Okay, so let's just jump right in. What if I told you that bringing a pet back from the dead sounds like total science fiction, right? Well, it's not. It's actually a real service you can buy today, and that's what we're going to get into, the wild world of pet cloning.
And boom, right out of the gate, we're hitting the biggest question in this whole thing. This quote is from Barbra Streisand, the celebrity who really put this topic on the map. And what she said right there, that's the key. That's the paradox we're going to unpack. So where did all this buzz come from? Well, a lot of it started with an absolute legend, Barbra Streisand. Back in 2017, she lost her dog, Samantha, who she absolutely adored. And, she just wasn't ready to let go completely.
So what she did was pretty incredible. Before Samantha died, she arranged to have some cells taken from her mouth and stomach, actually. And those very cells were used to create two brand new puppies, Miss Scarlet and Miss Violet. And get this, they were perfect genetic copies of Samantha.
Okay, so this whole story just makes you wonder, right? We all hear the word clone and our minds jump straight to the movies. But what are we really talking about scientifically? Let's get into the actual science here. So, when it comes right down to it, a clone is basically just a genetic copy. That's it. It's super important to know it's not the same animal coming back to life. Think of it more like a new creature that's been built using the exact same set of instructions, the same DNA as the original. Probably the easiest way to wrap your head around this is to think of a clone as an identical twin that was just born way later. They've got the exact same genetic hardware, right? But, and this is a huge but, they are not the same individual. They don't have the same memories, the same life experiences. They're a blank slate. All right, so we know what a clone is, but the next question is kind of mind-blowing. How on earth do they do it? I mean, how do you take a couple of cells from one dog and turn them into a living, breathing puppy? Let's take a look at the process. Okay, it's definitely a pretty intense lab procedure. First, they take a small tissue sample from the original dog. Then they get an egg cell from a different dog, a donor, and they basically scoop out its DNA. Then they inject the DNA from your pet into that now empty egg. A little jolt of electricity gets the whole thing to start dividing, and boom, you've got an embryo. From there, it's implanted into another dog, a surrogate mom, who carries the puppy. And that brings up something that I think a lot of people miss. This isn't just about your pet. To create one clone, you need at least 3 dogs. The original one for the DNA, an egg donor, and a surrogate mother. It's a whole team effort. So you might be wondering, what's the price tag on a procedure this futuristic? Well, you better be sitting down for this. To clone your dog, you're looking at about $100,000. Yeah, definitely not something you just decide to do on a whim. And that massive price tag really brings us back to the big emotional question, doesn't it? For $100,000, are you really getting your dog back? Is this genetic copy truly the same companion you lost? Well, the science is pretty firm here. The answer is no. The clone has the same genetic starting point, sure, but its personality, all the little quirks, what it's scared of, who it loves, all of that is shaped by its life, its environment. It's the classic nature versus nurture debate. And that's exactly what Barbra Streisand was talking about when she said her new dogs had different personalities. Okay, so personality is a no-go. They're not the same dog in that sense. But what about their health? Is there, a catch? Are these clones healthy? Do they live as long as a normal dog? You might expect them to have problems, but the evidence so far says they're actually pretty healthy. Take Snuppy, for example. He was the first dog ever cloned, all the way back in 2005. He was an Afghan hound, and he lived for 10 years. The average for his breed is about 11 years, so he was right there. It seems like clones can live perfectly normal, healthy lives. All right, so we've talked about what a clone is, and we've talked about how it's done. But now we have to get to the really tough part, the big one. Just because we can do this, should we? And this is where things get really, really controversial. And what's kind of crazy? This entire industry operates in a sort of Wild West. There are basically no laws on the books that deal with pet cloning. California tried to ban it way back in 2005, mainly because they were worried it would hurt pet adoptions from shelters, but the bill didn't pass, so it's largely unregulated. So the whole debate really comes down to 2 very different ways of looking at it. On one side, you have animal welfare groups. They're worried that these companies are taking advantage of grieving owners, and they point to the huge number of shelter pets that need homes. But the other side of the coin is that this is a deeply personal choice. For some people, it provides real comfort, a way to hold on to a connection.
And this quote from the Humane Society really gets to the heart of the argument against cloning. They're basically saying, look, with millions of perfectly wonderful dogs and cats already in shelters waiting for a home, spending a fortune to create a new one is, well, in their words, completely unnecessary.
So, when you put it all together, the incredible science, the staggering cost, and the really tough ethical questions, it all boils down to one thing, and it's a question for you. It's easy for us to sit here and talk about it in the abstract, but imagine it was your pet, the one you can't imagine living without. If you had the money, what would you do?